All right, settle in close. Dim the lights, if you haven't already, because what I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's a ripple from a place where the veil between this world and something far older, far darker, is threadbare. A place where the mountains breathe a cold, patient evil. Can you feel it? That prickle on the back of your neck? That sudden drop in temperature in the room, even if it's just in your mind? Good, hold onto that feeling. Because it's exactly what Eleanor and Thomas Davison felt, right before everything unraveled. It was late autumn, a few years back, when Mr. and Mrs. Davison, Thomas and Eleanor, packed up their lives in a bustling, suburban sprawl of Atlanta and decided to chase a dream of rustic tranquility. They'd found it, or so they thought, nestled deep within the forgotten folds of the Tennessee Appalachians. A charming, albeit dilapidated, cabin with a breathtaking view of ancient, mist-shrouded peaks. It was remote, wonderfully isolated, miles from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a winding gravel path that seemed to shrink the farther you drove. Perfect, Eleanor had sighed, breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air on their first day. No more sirens, no more traffic, just us and the wilderness. Thomas, a man of practicalities, smiled, but a shiver, no more than a phantom breeze, traced his spine. He dismissed it as the mountain chill, but the mountains, they were already watching. The descent begins. The early days were idyllic. Mornings were spent sipping coffee on the porch, watching the sun burn through the fog, painting the peaks in hues of gold and crimson. Afternoons were for exploring the vast, silent woods that pressed in on all sides, a green-black wall of ancient trees. But as the leaves turned to fire and then fell, exposing the gnarled skeletons of the forest, the silence began to shift. It wasn't merely quiet. It became heavy, oppressive. It started subtly, a fleeting shadow in their peripheral vision, just beyond the tree line, too tall, too dark. Eleanor would mention hearing faint, rhythmic tapping outside at night, like knuckles on wood. But when Thomas investigated, there was nothing, just the sigh of the wind through the pines. He dismissed it as an old house settling, or the sounds of nocturnal animals. But the feeling of being watched, an insistent, burning gaze from the surrounding wilderness, began to settle in. Imagine you're standing in their living room, the crackle of the fireplace doing little to warm the growing chill that seeped through the very walls. You glance out the window, expecting to see only the black abyss of the forest. But for a split second, you catch it, a pale, indistinct face, pressed against the glass, eyes like deep wells reflecting the dim cabin light. Before you can fully register it, it's gone. A trick of the light, a branch. Your mind tries to rationalize, but a cold knot forms in your stomach. That was Eleanor's first clear hallucination. She screamed, a raw, primal sound that brought Thomas running. He found her trembling, pointing wildly at the window. There was someone, a face. Thomas searched, flashlight beam cutting through the inky blackness, but found nothing. No footprints, no disturbed leaves. He tried to reassure her, attributing it to stress, the adjustments to isolated living. But doubt had begun to fester. The next night, it was Thomas's turn. He woke to a whisper right beside his ear. Not a human whisper, but something like dry leaves skittering across pavement, forming words just beyond comprehension. He bolted upright, heart hammering, but Eleanor slept soundly beside him. He stared into the darkness of their bedroom, straining, and then he saw it. In the deepest corner, where shadows clung like velvet, a figure began to coalesce. It was skeletal, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated, stretching towards him like a reaching branch. Its head was cocked, listening. Could you move? Could you scream? Or would you be frozen, your breath catching in your throat, as the impossible, unsettling shape slowly began to shift, to glide towards you? Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, willing it away. When he opened them, it was gone. He blamed exhaustion, the vividness of a huff dream, but the terror was real, a cold sweat dampening his sheets. The hallucinations became more frequent, blurring the lines between waking and nightmare. Eleanor would see monstrous, multi-limbed creatures scuttling just beneath the surface of the cabin's aged floorboards, their shadowy forms pressing up against the wood. She'd hear guttural growls emanating from the fireplace, or the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps thudding through the empty attic above them. She described the trees outside their windows, twisting into leering, malformed faces, their branches like bony fingers scratching at the glass. Thomas, meanwhile, was plagued by auditory terrors. He'd hear their names, distorted and elongated, echoing from the surrounding woods. Sometimes it sounded like a frantic, desperate weeping just outside their front door. Other times, it was a cacophony of ancient chants, deep and resonant, vibrating through the very earth beneath their feet, causing the cabin to hum with an unseen energy. He'd start seeing the faces from Eleanor's initial vision, but not just at the window. They'd flicker in reflections, in the dark pools of their coffee, in the wood grain of the walls. Always pale, always watching, always with those hollow, infinite eyes. They clung to each other, to anchors in a sea of encroaching madness. They tried to leave, but every time they drove down the long, winding gravel path, it seemed to stretch endlessly, the cabin never quite disappearing from their rearview mirror. The mountains seemed to close in, the trees forming an impenetrable, sentient barrier. The GPS on their phone would invariably glitch, showing them in the middle of nowhere, or worse, indicating they were driving in circles. One particularly horrifying night, the power went out. The complete darkness was absolute, suffocating. They huddled together, the meager glow of a lantern casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. Eleanor let out a choked gasp, pointing a trembling finger. Thomas, look. And there, projected onto the far wall, was a scene. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light, but a vivid, horrifying tableau. Figures, impossibly tall and gaunt, moved through a fog-laden forest. They were carrying something, dragging it. A body. Its face, even in the flickering projection, was unmistakably Eleanor's. Thomas screamed, his own mind snapping. He saw it too, but for him, it wasn't Eleanor. It was himself, being dragged into the trees by these silent, towering entities. This land, the mountains, they weren't just showing them things. They were showing them their fate. They were showing them what the mountains intended. Before we continue with the chilling end of the Davidson story, if you're finding yourself gripping your seat, if the hair on your arms is standing on end, then you know this isn't just a story. It's an experience. If you're brave enough to delve deeper into these kinds of true horror tales, be sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more unsettling narratives and leave a comment below. What's the scariest thing you've ever imagined while alone in the dark? Or maybe, what's a local legend from your area that keeps you awake at night? Let me know. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. The Davidsons trapped, their sanity unraveling. The next morning, the cabin was eerily silent. The power was back on. The The sun streamed through the windows, making the previous night's terror feel like a distant fever dream. But the strain on their faces, the wildness in their eyes, spoke of a reality far more disturbing. They tried to leave one last time. Thomas, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, backed the car down the gravel path. Eleanor sat beside him, clutching a crucifix, whispering prayers. They drove for hours, the cabin always just a bend behind them, the same twisted trees, the same oppressive silence. Finally, they pulled over. The fuel gauge was on empty. They were still on the same stretch of road, the cabin still visible through the rear window, mocking them. Thomas got out, staring at the cabin. The front door was slightly ajar. Eleanor, whimpering, pointed. "Look, Thomas." In the window, he looked, and there, pressed against the glass, were the pale faces. Not just one, not two, but a multitude. Their eyes, those dead, hollow eyes, were all fixed on them, and slowly, agonizingly, they began to smile. Wide, impossible grins that stretched their faces into grotesque, inhuman masks. Thomas didn't remember getting back in the car. He didn't remember driving. All he remembered was Eleanor's last, choked sound beside him, and the unbearable, mind-shattering sound of laughter echoing from the mountains around them. Months later, a lone hiker, deep off the beaten path, stumbled upon a rusted, abandoned car. The doors were ajar, the interior dusty. Local authorities were called. They found nothing inside but a single, crumpled map of the Appalachian trails, circled haphazardly with frantic, illegible scribbles. The cabin itself was discovered only after an aerial search. It stood silent, untouched, but when the deputies finally reached it, they found the front door wide open, swinging gently in the mountain breeze. Inside, there was no sign of Eleanor or Thomas Davidson. No struggle, no blood, nothing missing, just their belongings, neatly arranged, as if they'd just stepped out for a moment. But on their bed, carefully placed, were two small, hand-carved wooden dolls. Crudely fashioned, their eyes just two holes, their mouths gaping in a silent, permanent scream. What if the silence of the mountains wasn't empty? What if it was just listening? We think of wilderness as a place of peace, a refuge from the noise of our lives. But for some, the deep woods hold a different kind of sound, not the call of a bird or the rustle of a deer, but an echo of something you thought was locked away, safe inside your own mind. This is a story about that echo, and what happens when it calls back. Our story takes place in the fall of 2022, deep in the National Forest of North Carolina. It centers on a man named Billy Adam, an architect from Charlotte who believed nature could be mapped, measured, and conquered with the right gear and a good GPS. He was about to learn that some maps don't show the things you should truly be. Afraid of Billy's story is a stark reminder that the oldest places in this country hold the oldest fears. If you believe these warnings should be heard, and if you want to explore more of these dark corners with us, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every like and comment helps these stories find the people who need to hear them. Don't become an echo in the woods. Now, let's follow Billy Adam as he steps off the trail. Billy Adam loved the crisp, satisfying crunch of his expensive hiking boots on a bed of fallen leaves. It was the sound of control, of purpose. Back in Charlotte, his life was a cacophony of deadlines, client demands, and the hollow ring of a recently emptied apartment. Out here, the air was clean, the silence was absolute, and the path was clearly marked. He checked his GPS, a smug smile touching his lips. 2 more miles to the summit overlook. Easy. He paused to sip from his water bottle, tracing the ridgeline with his eyes. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the autumn canopy in hues of fire and blood. It was beautiful, almost aggressively. So, that's when he heard it. A single, perfect whistle. It wasn't a bird call. It was too pure, a clean, human-like note that cut through the air and seemed to hang there. Vibrating. Billy frowned, scanning the dense thicket of rhododendron too. His left, "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding small against the vastness. The only reply was the whisper of the wind through the pines. He shrugged it off. Another hiker, maybe, or just the wind playing tricks. He pushed on, the rhythm of his footsteps, a comforting metronome. 5 minutes later, he heard it again. This time, it was a voice, his own, Billy. It was a whisper, so faint he thought he'd imagined it. It sounded like it was right behind his ear. He spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. Nothing, just the trail, winding back into a deepening gloom. "Okay, not funny," he muttered to the trees, feeling a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Fatigue, that had to be it. Auditory hallucinations were a known side effect of physical exertion. He was a man of logic, of blueprints and stress load calculations. There was a rational explanation for everything. He walked faster. The sun dipped lower and long skeletal. Shadows stretched across the path. The woods grew darker, the silence more profound. Then the silence broke again. "I just don't think I love you anymore, Billy." He froze, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. The voice was unmistakable. It was Sarah's. The exact words, the same weary, final tone she had used 3 months ago in their kitchen. He could almost smell the stale coffee and her jasmine perfume. It wasn't a memory, it was a broadcast, played back with perfect, chilling fidelity. "Who's there?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "This isn't a joke." This time, the answer came from his right, a different voice. A gentle, frail voice he hadn't heard in a decade. His mother's. "William, you forgot your jacket again." Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't the wind. The forest knew him. It was digging into his mind, pulling out his deepest griefs and failures and whispering them back at him through the leaves. He broke into a stumbling run, abandoning any pretense of a measured hike. The GPS was forgotten, his destination irrelevant. The only direction was away. The voices came faster now, a cacophony of his past. His father's disappointed sigh after a failed exam, a childhood bully's taunt. Sarah's voice again, but this time laughing, a sound that now felt like a razor blade, scraping his soul. They weren't just random sounds. They were targeted, designed to unmake him, to peel back the layers of the competent architect and expose the terrified child beneath. He saw a flicker of movement in his periphery, something tall and impossibly thin darting between the trees, a silhouette of wrongness that his mind refused to process. When he snapped his head to look, it was gone. He was hallucinating now, his fear giving shape to the formless terror that stalked him. Tears of sheer terror streamed down his face as he ran blindly, branches whipping at his skin. He had to get out. He tripped over an exposed root and fell hard, crashing into the base of an ancient, gnarled oak. As he pushed himself up, His hand brushed against something carved into the bark. Words, no names. Dozens of them etched into the tree over years, maybe decades. And next to a handful of them, a second, more crudely carved word answered. A new sound cut through the chorus of his memories. The sound of a little girl crying. "Help me," the small voice sobbed, seeming to come from a small clearing just ahead. "I'm lost." It was a sound engineered to trigger every human instinct of protection and compassion. Billy's heart ached, but as he looked from the crying sound to the names carved on the tree, a horrific understanding dawned. This was the trap. This was how it baited you. It learned your regrets, your fears, and if that didn't work, it used your humanity against you. To answer the call was to become another name on the tree. He clamped his hands over his ears, squeezing. His eyes shut. "No," he whimpered, rocking back and forth. "You're not real." The crying intensified, morphing into a desperate scream that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the air. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not looking back, the screams chasing him, carried on a wind that now felt hungry and intelligent. He ran until his lungs burned and his vision swam, bursting from the tree line onto a gravel fire road just as the last sliver of light vanished from the sky. In the distance, he saw the faint glint of his car. He didn't stop running until his fingers closed around the cold steel of the door handle. Billy Adam never set foot in the wilderness again. He moved to a new apartment in the heart of the city, surrounding himself with concrete, steel, and the constant, anonymous hum of a million lives. He believed the noise would drown out the memory of the whispers. He believed he was safe. He believed the thing in the woods was bound to that ancient place. But some echoes have a long reach, and some things, once they have your name, never truly let you go. Billy stands in his kitchen now. Weeks later, the Appalachian nightmare of fading. Traumatic memory. He reaches for his favorite coffee mug, but his hand, still prone to trembling, fumbles. The ceramic mug slips, shattering on the tile floor with a loud crack. He curses under his breath, bending to pick up the pieces, and from the empty living room behind him, a voice, a perfect, crystal clear imitation of his own, sighs with quiet frustration. "Damn it, Billy." Imagine, if you dare, that you are miles from civilization. Deep in those ancient woods, the only sounds are the creak of timber, the rustle of unseen things, and the frantic thump of your own heart. Can you feel that cold dread coiling in your stomach? That's just the beginning. Before we dive deeper into the abyss, if this journey chills you to the bone, if you feel that primal fear stirring, then you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe for more chilling tales, and leave a comment below telling me what truly scares you. Your engagement helps us bring more of these untouched terrors to light. Now, let's continue. It was October, and the air in rural Pocahontas County, West Virginia, hung crisp and heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Adam and Diana Smith, city exiles from bustling Philadelphia, had rented a secluded cabin here. A last-minute decision spurred by Diana's craving for authentic autumn vibes and Adam's need for a digital detox. He was a software engineer, perpetually tethered to screens. She, a freelance graphic designer, sought inspiration in the wild. The cabin itself was charming. If a little rustic knotty pine walls, a stone fireplace, and windows that looked directly into a wall of dents ancient forest. The nearest town was a good hour's drive, and cell service was optimistically a single bar that flickered in and out like a dying thought. They called it getting back to basics. They'd soon discover just how basic and how terrifying basics could be. The first few days were idyllic. Long hikes, evenings by the fire, reading, talking. But then, the quiet started to change. It wasn't just silence, it was a listening silence. It began subtly, with the sounds. One afternoon, while Adam was chopping wood, he heard Diana call his name, clear as day, from the direction of the cabin. "Adam, can you come here for a second?" He leaned the axe against the block and walked back, but found the cabin door ajar and the interior empty. "Diana," he called out. A moment later, she emerged from the woods, a basket of foraged mushrooms. In her hand, "Did you call me?" he asked. She frowned. "No, I just got back." "Why?" An icy finger traced down his spine. He shook it off. The wind, he told himself. Or maybe he'd imagined it. But the incidents grew sharper, less deniable. Diana swore she heard faint music, a mournful, off-key melody, drifting from the deepest part of the woods at night. Adam heard what sounded uncannily like a baby crying, a thin, reedy wail that wasn't quite right, too sustained, too desperate, only to abruptly cease. They checked the surrounding area, but there was nothing. No other cabins, no lost hikers, just trees. Miles and miles of trees. The isolation, which had once been a comfort, began to warp their perceptions. One evening, as dusk bled indigo into the forest, Diana was sketching by the window. She swore the gnarled branches outside weren't just branches. They were twitching, shifting, reaching, not in the natural sway of wind, but with a deliberate, slow, predatory movement. She dropped her pencil, her heart hammering. "Adam," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Look at the trees." Adam, engrossed in a book, glanced up. "What about them, hun? They're just trees." But as he looked, he saw it too. The shadows deepening between the trunks seemed to coalesce, forming grotesque, fleeting shapes. A gaunt, elongated figure vanishing behind a thick oak. A pair of eyes, large and black, staring from the gloom. It was a trick of the light. Their tired minds playing games, they reasoned. But the games became less playful, more malicious. Sleep became a battle. Adam would wake in a cold sweat, convinced he'd heard scratching on the roof. Faint whispers right outside their window, murmuring their names in an ancient, sibilant tongue. Diana, on the other hand, began to see faces, leering. Visages in the grain of the cabin's wooden walls, in the flickering patterns of the firelight. They weren't just patterns, they were watching her. Their eyes, though carved by chance, seemed to follow her every move. One particularly dense, moonless night, the cabin felt like a cage. The air grew heavy, pressing in on them. Adam was trying to fix a faulty lamp, his hands trembling. Diana sat huddled on the couch, staring at the window, though the curtains were drawn. "They're outside, Adam," she whimpered. "I can feel them. They're just beyond the glass." Suddenly, a violent thud shook the cabin. It sounded like something large, heavy, falling against the wall just outside. They froze. Then, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards. Adam grabbed a heavy fireplace poker. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's them," Diana breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "The things from the woods, they want in." The growling intensified, circling the cabin. It wasn't an animal sound. It was too deep, too resonant, too intelligent. Then, a voice, Diana's voice, clear and panicked, called from outside. "Adam, Adam, help me. They've got me." Adam's blood ran cold. He looked at Diana, still huddled on the couch, her face a mask of terror. "Diana, you're right here." He gasped then, from another side of the cabin. Adam's voice echoed back, distorted, mocking. "No, I'm here, Diana. Come outside, come join us." Panic seized them both. Their own voices, twisted into a cruel mimicry, were being used against them. The line between reality and hallucination blurred into a terrifying, indistinguishable haze. Was it real, or were their minds finally cracking? Under the pressure of the mountain's malevolent influence, Adam rushed to the window, tearing back the curtain. There was nothing but the inky blackness of the forest, the trees standing like silent, watchful sentinels. But as he pressed his face to the glass, a shape began to form in the deepest part of the gloom, just beyond the edge of the porch. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to ripple like heat haze. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was a distortion, a dark void in the fabric of the night. And as it solidified, Adam saw a pair of eyes, huge, reflective, and utterly devoid of anything he recognized as life. Staring directly back at him, he screamed. A raw, primal sound ripped from his throat, and stumbled backward, colliding with Diana. In the split second before he hit the floor, he saw her face. Her beautiful, familiar face, contorted into a monstrous rictus of agony and fear. And then, her eyes. They weren't Diana's eyes anymore. They were large, black, and reflective, just like the things outside. Her mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural smile, revealing too many teeth. He scrambled away, his body screaming in protest. Was this the final, horrifying hallucination? Or was she, them? The cabin descended into chaos. The sounds from outside became a cacophony of mimicked voices, growls, and unearthly howls. The floorboards creaked as if something immense was moving beneath them. The faces in the wood grain of the walls seemed to writhe, their expressions shifting from tormented to gleeful. Adam was trapped, his mind spiraling. He couldn't tell what was real, what was a figment of his terror, or if he himself was already gone. The county sheriff, responding to a concerned call from the cabin's owner when the rent payments stopped coming, found the cabin eerily quiet 2 weeks later. The door was ajar, a faint, unnatural chill lingering in the air. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, just the lingering scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and ancient. Adam and Diana Smith were never found. Their belongings were still there, neatly arranged. The car was in the driveway. The only anomaly was a single, small recorder Adam had brought along for nature sounds. It sat on the coffee table, blinking faintly. The sheriff pressed play. For a moment, there was only static. Then, the faint sound of wind, followed by whispers. Not human whispers, but a low, sibilant murmur that seemed to coil around the listener. Then, a woman's scream, unmistakable. Diana's scream, followed by a man's frantic warnings. Adam's, and then, laughter. Low, guttural, chilling. Laughter that didn't sound quite human. And then, silence. A silence that was heavier, more profound than any sound. A silence that seemed to carry the weight of untold horrors. The sheriff turned it off, a shiver running down his spine that had nothing to do with the cabin's chill. He reported them as missing, But he knew, deep down, that they weren't just missing, they were gone, absorbed. So, the next time you think about escaping to the quiet solitude of the mountains, remember Adam and Diana. Remember the ancient, watching woods, and the things that dwell within. Because some places don't just hold secrets, they consume them. And sometimes, those secrets reach out, not just to touch you, but to pull you in forever. You never know what's truly watching, waiting for you to step off the beaten path. Have you ever felt the raw, primal fear of absolute solitude, deep in a place where the trees are older than nations, and the silence holds 1,000 screaming secrets? Imagine, if you will, the crushing weight of that silence, broken only by the frantic beat of your own heart against your ribs. That's the feeling that clings to the ancient bones of the Appalachian Mountains, a place where the veil between our world and something truly other is frighteningly thin. This isn't just a story. It's a descent into the kind of horror that burrows into your mind and whispers in the dark long after you've closed your eyes. This is the story of Sam Daniel. He was a man, much like yourself perhaps, in his late 20s, early 30s, looking for an escape. Not from anything tangible, more from the numbing routine of his digital existence. He worked in tech, lived in a bustling city somewhere in Ohio, and yearned for the kind of quiet that only untouched wilderness could offer. So, in the crisp, unforgiving late autumn of 2023, he packed his gear, left his phone in the car for a true digital detox, and drove a battered Subaru south into the heart of West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. He sought a forgotten, unmarked trail mentioned only in obscure online forums, a path rumored to lead to a breathtaking, secluded vista deep within a section of the mountains locals called the Whispering Ridge. He just wanted a few days of peace, of clean air, of self. He found something else entirely. If this chilling prelude has already sent a shiver down your spine, if the thought of untamed wilderness and ancient horrors grips you, then show us some love. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more terrifying true stories and unsettling tales, and most importantly, tell us in the comments, what's your absolute deepest, most primal fear when you're utterly alone in the wild? Your answers might just inspire our next nightmare. Sam's initial days were idyllic. The air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the turning leaves, painting the forest floor in hues of amber and rust. He hiked. For miles, a quiet contentment settling over him. But on the third day, a subtle shift occurred. The sky, which had been a clear, brilliant blue, began to bruise with heavy, low-hanging clouds. A chill wind picked up, carrying with it a scent Sam couldn't place. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood mixed with decaying leaves. He consulted his worn topographical map, noticing an anomaly. A faint, almost imperceptible line veered off the main trail, right where he stood. It promised a shortcut, a way to reach his desired vantage point before the storm truly broke. It looked barely used, just a deer trail, really. But the promise of shelter and the vista lured him. Would you have taken it? Would curiosity win out over caution when the air itself felt heavy with warning? Sam, much like you might, decided to take the risk. The shortcut quickly dissolved into an indistinguishable tangle of undergrowth. The trees grew denser here, their branches interwoven like skeletal fingers, blocking out the sky. The light became a sickly green, then faded almost entirely as the storm clouds deepened. Sam pushed on, telling himself he was close, that the vista was just beyond the next rise. But the woods grew eerier with every step. The chirping of birds ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on his ears, so profound it hummed. He tried to whistle, just to break it, but his throat felt dry, constricted. Then came the sounds, not the crack of a twig or the rustle of leaves, but something far more unsettling, a faint guttural hum that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath his boots. It wasn't organic, not animal. It was a resonant, vibrating drone that seemed to thrum in his bones, making his teeth ache. He stopped, heart hammering. He spun around, trying to pinpoint its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. As twilight bled into a premature night, Sam stumbled into a clearing that wasn't on any map. It was a circular, perfectly bare patch of earth, surrounded by ancient, gnarled trees that leaned inward like silent, judging specters. In the center, a solitary, immense stone, too smooth and too regular to be natural, protruded from the ground. Like a broken tooth, it looked like an altar. And then, the true horror began to unfurl within Sam's mind. Exhaustion, fear, and something else, something insidious, began to work on him. He saw movement in his periphery, fleeting shadows darting behind trees that couldn't possibly be there. A flicker of sickly yellow eyes, two pinpricks of malevolence, blinked from the impenetrable darkness between the trunks, vanishing the instant he tried to focus. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to clear his head, but when he opened them, the clearing seemed to breathe. The stone pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, and the surrounding trees no longer looked like trees. Their branches twisted into grotesque limbs, their bark resembled leathery, stretched skin, and their knotholes became gaping, silent mouths. He heard whispers now, not just the wind, distorted, multitonal, slithering sounds that seemed to speak his name. Then something else, something ancient and forgotten, a language that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. "Sam, come forth, join us." He tried to run, but his legs felt heavy, as if roots were anchoring him to the spot. The air in the clearing thickened, becoming viscous, suffocating. He saw his own hands holding the strap of his backpack, but they looked alien, long, bony, with fingers that seemed to stretch and contort, their skin mottled and grey. He squeezed his eyes shut again, hard this time, pressing his thumbs into his temples, trying to push the images away, not real, fatigue, fear, hallucination. But when he opened them, the stone in the center was no longer just a stone. Etched onto its surface, not carved, but growing from within, was swirling patterns, intricate and disturbing. And from these patterns, faces began to emerge, gaunt, elongated faces with hollow eyes and gaping mouths, eternally screaming. They were not static. They shifted, their expressions morphing from agony to a silent, ancient joy. One face, closest to him, elongated, its mouth widening impossibly, and from within that inky depth, Sam heard not whispers, but a low, wet gurgle, followed by a voice that was undeniably his own, but warped, corrupted, saying, "You are already here." A horrifying mental image seared itself into his brain. He saw himself, not as Sam Daniel, but as one of those faces, perpetually trapped in the stone, his own eyes hollow, his own mouth stretched in a silent, endless shriek. He felt the cold touch of unseen hands on his skin, 100 icy points, probing, caressing, pulling him towards the stone. his heart hammered, threatening to burst from his chest. Nausea churned in his gut, and a dizzying wave of disorientation washed over him. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their monstrous mouths now openly drooling a viscous, black liquid that shimmered with an inner light. Sam screamed, a raw, ragged sound ripped from his throat. He finally managed to move, stumbling, falling, crawling forward, away from the stone, away from the faces, away from the things that watched from the shadows. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to escape the clearing, escape the horror that had taken root not just in the forest, but in his very mind. He scrambled blindly through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his skin, the hum in his bones growing louder, the whispers now a chorus, a cacophony of ancient voices laughing at him, mocking his futile struggle. He ran until his lungs burned, until his muscles screamed in protest, until the visions blurred into a terrifying kaleidoscope of impossible shapes and sounds. The last thing Sam remembered with any clarity was tripping over an unseen root, falling headfirst into the darkness, a final, chilling whisper echoing in his ears. "Welcome home." Days later, a search party found Sam Daniels' abandoned Subaru. At the trailhead, his hiking gear was still neatly packed in the trunk. His phone, fully charged, sat untouched on the passenger seat. Of Sam himself, there was no trace. No footprints beyond the trailhead, no broken branches, no sign of struggle. Nothing, except, sometimes, when the wind howls just right through the highest peaks of the Whispering Ridge, hikers claim to hear it. Not the wind, not animals, but a faint guttural hum that seems to thrum in their very bones. And sometimes, if you listen very closely, if you let the silence of the ancient mountains fill your ears, you might hear a whisper carried on the wind, a voice that sounds almost human, but not quite, saying something indistinguishable, ancient, and utterly, terrifyingly knowing. What do you think happened to Sam Daniel? Did he simply get lost? Or did he, like so many others who ventured too deep into the Appalachians, become another secret whispered by the ancient trees, another face etched into the very fabric of the mountains' enduring horror? The Appalachians have a way of keeping what they claim, and some secrets, once tasted, refuse to let go. Alright, settle in, because if there's one thing the deep, gnarled roots of the Appalachian Mountains are good at, it's whispering secrets, ancient, unsettling secrets that cling to the mist like a second skin. You think you know fear, maybe. You've seen a slasher flick, or been startled by a jump scare. But what if I told you that the true horror isn't what jumps out at you, but what slowly, irrevocably, crawls into your mind? What if it's not the monster chasing you, but the one you become in the darkest corners of your own thoughts? Tonight, we're delving into a true tale from those very mountains. A story that blurs the lines between reality and the waking nightmare. So, before we descend into this particular hell, do me a solid. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and for God's sake, tell me in the comments below, what's the one fear that truly paralyzes you? Because after this, you might just find a new one. Now, imagine this. The year is 1997. The place, deep in the Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Not the tourist trails, not the pretty overlooks. We're talking about the forgotten paths. The ones swallowed by kudzu and shadow. Our unlucky soul today is a man named Ethan. He wasn't a thrill seeker, not really. Just a photographer, an amateur naturalist, who believed the most untamed beauty lay where others feared to tread. He went in search of a specific, rare orchid, lost to the maps, rumored to bloom only in the most remote, untouched hollows. He found more than just a flower. You're Ethan. Feel the damp air clinging to your skin, the scent of pine and decay filling your lungs. 2 days you've been out here, the chirping of crickets your only constant companion, the distant hoot of an owl your nightly lullaby. But now, as dusk bleeds into a starless night, something feels off. The forest isn't murmuring, it's holding its breath. Can you feel it? That prickle on the back of your neck. It's not the chill of the evening. It's the cold gaze of something unseen. You set up your small tent near a stagnant creek, the water black and reflective, mirroring the skeletal trees above. The first night, it was just sounds, twigs snapping when there was no wind, a low, guttural sigh that seemed to echo from the hollow earth beneath your sleeping bag. You rationalized it, animals, the wind playing tricks. But deep down, you knew, animals don't mock. And that sigh, it felt like it was right outside your tent. Flap, a breath too heavy, too deliberate. The second night, the sounds intensified. Not just sighs, but whispers. Indistinct at first, like static on an old radio, then slowly, agonizingly, coalescing into something that sounds almost like your name. ETHAA, Ann ... drifting on the unseen currents. A voice not quite human, not quite animal, it's thin, reedy, like dried leaves scraping together, yet it carries the weight of ancient sorrow. You clamp your hands over your ears, heart thundering against your ribs. Are you truly hearing this, or is the isolation beginning to fray the edges of your sanity? What would you do in that moment? Curl tighter in your sleeping bag, praying for dawn, or cautiously reach for your heavy flashlight, daring to peer into the abyss? Ethan, bless his knife heart, chose the latter. He unzipped the tent just a crack, the beam of his flashlight cutting a trembling swath through the oppressive darkness. Nothing, only the familiar silhouettes of trees, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for a sky that refused to show its face. But then, as he began to retract, a flicker, a movement at the very edge of his peripheral vision, too fast to discern, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. The third day was worse. The sun was up, but it brought no comfort. The whispers followed him, not just at night, but in the glaring daylight. They coiled around him as he hiked, a constant, insidious hum that slowly began to shape itself into words. Not his name anymore, but phrases, accusations. You shouldn't be here. You're lost. Give up. He stumbled, his mind reeling. He hadn't spoken to a soul in days. No one knew he was out here. How could anything know his thoughts, his exhaustion, his growing despair? Then came the visual disturbances. First, it was just patterns in the tree bark, shifting, morphing into distorted faces, eyes wide with silent screams. A trick of the light, he told himself, but the faces were too vivid, too real. Then, the shadows under the trees began to writhe. Not just the natural play of light and shade, but something else. Elongated, skeletal forms that seemed to undulate, beckoning him deeper, further off the trail. He started talking to himself, denying what he saw, trying to anchor himself to reality. He started to doubt his memories, his own name. Is this what true loneliness felt like, or was something actively twisting his perception? He found the orchid on the fourth day, or rather, it found him. Nestled in a hollow, its petals a lurid impossible shade of scarlet, almost blood red against the decaying leaves. But as he knelt to photograph it, the air grew heavy, suffocating. The whispers intensified, now a cacophony, a chorus of unseen voices, chanting, accusing, demanding. And then he saw them. Not in the shadows, not in the bark, but right there, in front of him, disturbing hallucinations, figures, human-like but horribly wrong. Their limbs too long, their bodies too thin, their faces stretched into gaunt masks of silent agony. They weren't solid. They shimmered like heat haze, their outlines blurring at the edges, like badly rendered digital apparitions in the real world. They moved slowly, deliberately, not towards him, but around him, forming a tightening circle. Each one seemed to mirror a different aspect of his growing fear. One was gaunt with hunger, its eyes hollow pits. Another wore an expression of profound, soul-crushing despair. A third, the most terrifying, had a wide, unsettling grin that stretched impossibly far, revealing too many teeth. And its eyes were fixed on him with an unblinking, malevolent glee. Could you stand your ground? Could you rationalize this away? Or would primal terror seize you? Ethan screamed. He didn't know he could still scream. He dropped his expensive camera, turning to flee. But the world around him had become a kaleidoscope of horror. The trees themselves seemed to twist and writhe, their branches becoming grasping claws. The ground beneath his feet turned into a shifting morass, threatening to swallow him whole. The air itself burned with an icy cold, filling him with a sense of dread so profound it felt like his very soul was being ripped from his body. He ran. He didn't know where, didn't care. The hallucinations pursued him, mocking his every stumble, their silent, distorted faces appearing in the leaves, in the patterns of light, even in the reflection of his own sweat-slicked face on his water bottle. He hallucinated voices from his past, his mother, his friends twisting their words into insults, accusations, telling him he was already dead, already lost. His sense of self was dissolving, replaced by a frantic, animalistic will to escape. Something he couldn't even name. He doesn't remember how he got out. One moment, he was surrounded by the horrifying visions. The next, he was stumbling onto a gravel road, collapsing onto the shoulder, gasping for air. The sun high and blinding, the world suddenly, jarringly, normal. He was found hours later, rambling incoherently, dehydrated, malnourished, but physically, miraculously, unharmed. That was Ethan's story. He spent months in a psychiatric ward, diagnosed with extreme psychosis, hallucination disorder, and PTSD. Doctors tried to help him, but they couldn't explain what he saw, what he heard, or why he was suddenly cured of his psychosis the moment he was out of the mountains. He never went back to the Monongahela. He never touched a camera again. But here's the kicker. Years later, a fellow researcher stumbled upon an old, forgotten folk tale from that very region. A tale about certain hollows deep within the Appalachians, where the veil between worlds is thin. Places where something ancient and hungry resides, feeding not on flesh, but on sanity, on fear. They call it the haunt of the hollows, a being that doesn't just haunt a place, but actively hunts a mind, meticulously unraveling it thread by thread, until the victim becomes an empty vessel, driven mad by visions that only they can see. Ethan survived, yes, but did he escape? Or did the haunt merely fill itself on his sanity, leaving him just enough of himself to remember the terror, to serve as a cautionary tale? Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about what kills you, but what leaves you alive, yet fundamentally, irrevocably broken. So, Let me know in the comments. Do you think Ethan was truly hallucinating? Or did something in those mountains truly twist his reality? And would you ever dare to venture into the untamed heart of the Appalachians after hearing a story like this? The mountains are still there, waiting. And some things that whisper in the dark, they never truly leave you. Stay safe out there.